On a winter morning in lower Manhattan, a wrecking ball swings where Washington Street once smelled like coffee, paper, and machine oil. Men in hard hats measure a hole that will soon swallow a neighborhood, while a banker in a tailored coat watches from a clean distance. David Rockefeller wants a monument that will force the world to look downtown again, but the first thing his monument produces is silence, then lawsuits, then ash. Years before anyone says the words September 11th, the towers will bleed money, burn from the inside, and carry a cost-cut flaw that turns safety into an upgrade. Was this progress, or a family obsession poured into steel? A banker tries to move Manhattan. If you want to understand the towers, begin with a feeling David Rockefeller could not tolerate: downtown looking small. The year is 1960. The financial district still carries the weight of history: cobblestones and cast iron, gas lamps converted to electric, buildings that remember when Wall Street meant an actual wall. But David Rockefeller walks these streets and sees decay. He sees office towers half empty. He sees companies moving to Midtown, to Park Avenue, to glass boxes with modern lobbies and air conditioning that actually works. He sees his own bank, Chase Manhattan, sitting like a landlocked ship in a harbor everyone is abandoning. David is not just any banker. He is a Rockefeller. His grandfather bought entire industries. His father built Rockefeller Center when the city said it could not be done. Legacy is not optional in this family. It is oxygen. And downtown Manhattan in 1960 does not look like a legacy. It looks like a mistake. The numbers tell the story. Between 1945 and 1960, Midtown added 60 million square feet of office space. Downtown added 12 million. Corporations want new buildings with floor plates wide enough for modern layouts, ceilings high enough for dropped lighting, elevator banks fast enough that executives do not grow old waiting. Downtown offers narrow lots, outdated wiring, and the romantic inconvenience of history. David Rockefeller decides history is negotiable. He finds his lever in the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey, a peculiar creature of government that operates like a private empire. The Port Authority runs bridges, tunnels, airports, and docks. It answers to 2 governors, but truly answers to no one. It borrows money on its own authority, condemns land without city approval, and builds projects too big for normal democracy to stop. It is perfect. The pitch is simple. Build a World Trade Center. Make it massive. Make it impossible to ignore. Fill it with international commerce, banks, import firms, shipping companies. Create a symbol so large that downtown becomes the center again, not by choice, but by gravitational force. The Port Authority likes the idea. Big projects justify big budgets. Big budgets justify big staffs. Big staffs justify existence. But there is a problem. A World Trade Center needs land. A lot of land. And in lower Manhattan, land means people. It means businesses. It means leases and lawsuits and the ugly work of removal. It means finding 13 blocks where the resistance will be weakest and the political cost manageable. They find Radio Row. The neighborhood sits west of Broadway. It's a tangle of small shops selling radios, electronics, vacuum tubes, and used equipment. It is loud and cramped and immigrant dense. The merchants are Syrian, Lebanese, Greek, Eastern European, Jewish. They fix things, resell things, tinker in back rooms. The profit margins are thin. The political connections are thinner. David Rockefeller does not visit Radio Row. Men like him do not need to. They read reports. They see maps. They approve plans. The plan says Radio Row is blighted. Blighted is the magic word. It means the law allows removal. It means progress requires sacrifice. It means someone else pays the cost. The question forms quietly in back rooms and law offices, in conversations that will never be recorded. Who gets removed when a powerful man calls it renewal? The answer is already written. It is always written, in the neighborhood that had no lobby. 13 blocks can vanish faster than a rumor when the paperwork is signed by people who never walk the streets. Oscar Nadell owns a radio shop on Cortlandt Street. He has owned it since 1946, back when soldiers came home, wanting to understand the equipment they used in the war. He knows his customers by name. He knows their children. He extends credit when times are tight and accepts payment in installments. His lease is legal. His rent is current. His business is his life. In 1961, he receives a letter. The Port Authority is acquiring his property for public use. He has 90 days. Nadell is not alone. 300 businesses receive the same letter. 30,000 people work in Radio Row. They are shopkeepers, repair technicians, salesmen, stockroom clerks, and they are the unseen machinery of small commerce, the kind that does not appear in bank reports or urban planning documents. The Port Authority offers relocation assistance. It sounds generous until you read the terms. The money covers moving costs, not lost customers. It covers physical displacement, not the death of a business model. Radio Row works because of density. Customers come to the neighborhood, not to individual shops. Scatter the shops and you kill the ecosystem. The merchants organize. They hire lawyers. They argue that the project is not truly public use, that the Port Authority is condemning private property to build speculative office space, that this violates the constitutional limits on eminent domain. The argument is legally sound. It is also legally irrelevant. The courts rule against them. The judges say the Port Authority has broad discretion to define public purpose. The World Trade Center will stimulate commerce, create jobs, enhance the city's competitive position. The fact that private tenants will occupy the space does not change its public character. The logic is circular but binding. Some merchants fight anyway. They refuse to leave. They barricade their doors. They chain themselves to counters. The Port Authority responds with eviction orders, then sheriffs, then padlocks. By 1964, the demolition begins. The wrecking balls come in winter. The buildings come down in sections, brick and timber and plaster dust, spreading across the streets like fog. Nadell watches from across the street as his shop disappears into a truck bed. His inventory is already sold or stored. His customers are already gone. The building falls in an afternoon. A photographer captures the moment. The image shows a gap in the streetscape, raw and sudden like a missing tooth. In the foreground, a man in a coat stands with his hands in his pockets. His face is unreadable. The caption does not name him. Radio Row leaves almost no archive. There are no oral histories, no museum exhibits, no memorial plaques. The neighborhood is removed and then erased from memory as if it never existed. This is not accidental. Removal works best when it is fast and final. The emotional question forms in the empty blocks. What kind of empire begins by erasing witnesses? Years later, urban historians will call Radio Row a case study in urban renewal gone wrong, a moment when the needs of capital overrode the rights of community. But in 1964, the language is different. The language is progress. The language is blight removal. The language is international competitiveness. David Rockefeller does not attend the demolition. He is busy with other matters, meetings in Midtown, decisions about bank mergers and foreign loans. The removal of Radio Row is a line item in a larger plan, a necessary step toward a larger goal. He will never visit the site during construction. He will never meet Oscar Nadell or any of the other displaced merchants. But their removal is the foundation. Everything built on top of it carries the weight of that original wound. Every argument about the towers, every lawsuit, every public objection will circle back to this moment. The decision to erase 13 blocks becomes the decision that poisons every later claim of civic good. The Port Authority does not see it that way. They see dirt moving on schedule. They see a project advancing. They see the future arriving in dump trucks. When the dream became non-negotiable, the plan hardens the moment it stops being about offices and starts being about winning. The architect is Minoru Yamasaki, a Japanese-American who survived internment during the war and built his career on graceful modernism. He is not the first choice. The Port Authority interviews bigger names, louder egos, architects who specialize in spectacle. But Yamasaki listens. He asks questions. He talks about human scale and beauty. The Port Authority likes that he is polite and that his fees are reasonable. Yamasaki's first instinct is wrong. He proposes a cluster of lower buildings, maybe 70 stories each, spread across the 16-acre site. And the Port Authority says no. They want height. They want a statement. They want something that will appear in every photograph of the Manhattan skyline. Yamasaki revises. He draws towers, 2 of them, identical twins, 110 stories each, the tallest buildings in the world. The design is technically daring and aesthetically strange. The towers have no traditional skeleton of beams and columns. Instead, the exterior walls carry the load, a tube of steel that allows vast open floors inside. The windows are narrow, just 18 inches wide, because Yamasaki is afraid of heights and believes others share his fear. The facade is covered in aluminum, giving the towers a shimmering, almost unreal quality in certain light. The Port Authority loves it. The design is bold, it is singular, it is unmistakably new. The engineering is assigned to Leslie Robertson, a structural engineer who understands that building this high means rethinking everything. The towers will sway in wind. They will need elevators that travel in express shafts, skipping floors to reach sky lobbies where passengers transfer to local cars. They will need foundation work that goes 7 stories underground, displacing water, bedrock, and the infrastructure of a living city. The cost estimates begin at $335 million. This is 1964 money, back when $1 million still meant something. The estimate will prove wildly optimistic, but cost is a future problem. The present problem is selling the vision. New York in the mid-1960s is skeptical of mega projects. The city has seen too many urban renewal disasters, and too many highways that cut neighborhoods in half, too many public housing towers that turn into vertical slums. The World Trade Center is being built by an authority that pays no property taxes, answers to no local voters, and is condemning private land for private profit. The opposition is loud. Critics call the towers arrogant, ugly, wasteful. The architecture press calls them banal. The real estate industry calls them market distorting, a government-subsidized competitor that will flood Lower Manhattan with office space no one needs. Community groups call them a monument to displacement. The Port Authority responds with renderings and promises. The towers will create jobs. They will generate tax revenue. They will transform the waterfront, stimulate tourism, enhance the city's global standing. The opposition is dismissed as nostalgia, parochialism, fear of change. The selling language becomes moral. This is not just construction. This is a statement about American ambition, about the power of commerce to bind nations, about New York's destiny as the capital of the world. To oppose the towers is to oppose progress itself. Ground breaks in 1966. The excavation alone is staggering. The foundation must go 70 feet down, below the water table, below the subway tunnels, down to bedrock. The hole requires a slurry wall, a trench filled with liquid mud that hardens into a concrete barrier holding back the Hudson River. 1.2 million cubic yards of earth and rock are removed. Some of it is dumped in the river, creating 23 acres of new land that will become Battery Park City. The construction will take 7 years. At peak, the 3,500 workers are on site. The tower cranes rise with the steel, adding floors in a rhythm that becomes almost hypnotic. The city watches the towers grow and still does not know what to think. David Rockefeller watches too. His bank, Chase Manhattan, will be a major tenant. His vision is becoming solid, floor by floor. The towers are not beautiful in any traditional sense. They are too large for beauty, but they are undeniable. They force attention. They remake the skyline. If the city hates the idea, how do you force it to exist anyway? You build it too big to stop. You build it too fast to reverse. You build it with public money and private ambition, and you call the result inevitable. By the time the North Tower tops out in 1970, the towers are already a fact. They exist in steel and concrete and glass. The arguments against them are now historical curiosities. The question shifts from whether they should exist to what they will become. The answer to that question will take decades to understand. The numbers that refuse to obey. A skyscraper can be tall and still feel empty, and emptiness is expensive when the interest clock never sleeps. The World Trade Center opens in 1973. The North Tower is technically finished. The South Tower is still receiving tenants. The plaza is raw concrete and temporary fencing. The whole complex feels unfinished, like a stage set waiting for actors who have not yet arrived. The Port Authority expects triumph. They expect corporations lining up for prestige addresses, international firms claiming floors, a rush of tenants eager to occupy the tallest buildings in the world. They expect the market to validate the vision. The market does not cooperate. The towers contain 10 million square feet of rentable space. That is more office space than exists in most American cities. It is more than downtown Manhattan, absorbed in the previous decade. The Port Authority built on the assumption that if you create supply, demand will follow. The assumption is wrong. By the end of 1973, the complex is 30% vacant. Entire floors sit empty. Elevator banks serve nobody. The Port Authority becomes its own largest tenant, moving staff from other locations to fill the void. It is a counting theater, moving money from one pocket to another and calling it progress. The financial picture is grim. The project cost $800 million, more than double the original estimate. The Port Authority financed it with bonds backed by toll revenue from bridges and tunnels. Those bonds carry interest. The interest compounds. The towers need to generate enough rent to cover debt service, operating costs, and maintenance. They are failing. The vacancy rate for Lower Manhattan office space is 16%. The towers add 10 million square feet into that market. Simple math says the problem will get worse before it gets better. Landlords across the financial district watch their own buildings empty out as tenants consolidate into newer space. The towers are not stimulating the market, they are cannibalizing it. The Port Authority responds with incentives. They offer rent discounts, free build-outs, months of occupancy at no cost. They market the towers as a destination, not just an address. The observation deck opens on the South Tower, 107 stories up, offering views that stretch 50 miles on clear days. Tourists come, tenants do not. By 1975, the vacancy crisis is public knowledge. The New York Times runs features on the empty towers. Television news uses the complex as a symbol of government overreach and economic miscalculation. The towers that were supposed to prove downtown's vitality instead prove its vulnerability. David Rockefeller does not comment publicly. Chase Manhattan is a tenant, occupying several floors, but the bank is not expanding. The dream of international commerce filling the towers has not materialized. Import firms do not need prestige addresses. Shipping companies do not need 100 stories. The market wanted practicality. The Port Authority built symbolism. The deeper problem is structural. The towers are expensive to operate. The elevators alone require constant maintenance. The heating and cooling systems for 10 million square feet consume energy at rates that shock even the engineers. The Port Authority is not a real estate company. It is a transportation authority that built the world's largest office complex and discovered too late that running buildings is different from running bridges. Some numbers make the scale clear. Each tower has 99 elevators. The North Tower has 43,000 windows. The complex employs 500 maintenance workers. The electrical system draws enough power to serve a city of 100,000 people. The towers are not buildings. They are vertical cities, and cities are expensive. The question forms in boardrooms and editorial pages. Did anyone in power admit it was failing, or did they only learn to hide it? The answer is both. Internal memos acknowledge the problem. Staff meetings discuss the vacancy crisis openly, but public statements remain optimistic. The Port Authority insists the market will adjust, that the towers will fill, that the vision will be vindicated. Admitting failure would mean admitting the project should never have been built. That admission would crater bond values, invite lawsuits, and destroy careers. So the towers stand, half-empty, bleeding money, justified by a logic that substitutes hope for evidence. By 1978, the market begins to turn. The financial industry starts expanding again. New firms need space. The towers slowly fill, not because they are desirable, but because they are available. The vacancy rate drops to 20%, then 15%. It is progress, but slow and grudging. The Port Authority declares victory. They point to rising occupancy, new leases, international tenants. They do not mention the discounts, the concessions, the years of operating losses. They do not mention that the towers will not generate positive cash flow for another decade. But the public relations war is won. The towers are no longer a joke. They are a fact of the skyline, a backdrop for tourism, a symbol that has outlasted its critics simply by existing long enough. The financial wound, though, never fully heals. The towers will always carry the weight of their origin, the mismatch between ambition and economics. They were built to prove a point, not to meet a need. The market eventually accepts them, but it never forgives them. The fire that broke the spell. One afternoon, smoke climbs through the North Tower, and the myth of modern safety turns into an evacuation run in the dark. February 13th, 1975. It is a Thursday. The North Tower has been open for 2 years. The building is busy, offices filling with the afternoon rhythm of typing and phone calls and deals closing. The Port Authority has started to believe their own publicity. The towers are modern, They are fireproof. They are engineered to withstand anything. Then the 11th floor starts to burn. The fire begins in a storage room. The cause is arson, though that will not be confirmed for weeks. Telephone cables ignite first. The insulation is old, flammable, installed during construction when budgets were tight and inspections were light. The flames spread fast, feeding on materials that were supposed to be fireproof but never were. Smoke fills the floor. The ventilation system, designed to circulate air, instead circulates smoke. Within minutes, the 11th floor is uninhabitable. Within 30 minutes, smoke is rising through elevator shafts, stairwells, and utility cores. Floors above the fire start to smell burning plastic. The alarm system fails. Not completely, but partially, in ways that turn confusion into chaos. Some floors receive automated messages. Other floors receive nothing. The public address system crackles with static and conflicting instructions. Evacuate, stay in place, use the stairs, wait for help. People make their own decisions. Some head for the stairs immediately. Others wait by their desks, uncertain, trusting the building to protect them. The stairs fill slowly, then all at once, as word spreads and fear overrides hesitation. The stairs are narrow. The code required 2 means of egress per floor, and the Port Authority complied, barely. But 2 stairwells for a floor that holds 1,000 people creates bottlenecks. The descent is slow, orderly at first, then tense as smoke enters the stairwells from below. The fire burns for 3 hours. The New York Fire Department sends 200 firefighters. They climb the stairs in full gear, carrying hoses and equipment, passing evacuees heading down. The heat is intense. The smoke is toxic. Firefighters later report that the conditions inside the North Tower are among the worst they have encountered. The fire is contained to 6 floors, but the damage spreads farther. Smoke reaches the 19th floor. Water from hoses floods the lower levels. The sprinkler system, which was supposed to activate automatically, fails in several sections. The backup power for emergency lighting works in some stairwells, fails in others. 6 people are injured, none die. The Port Authority will call this a success. They will point to the evacuation, the response time, the fact that the building did not collapse. They will say the towers performed as designed, but the people who were there tell a different story. They talk about darkness, about breathing through wet cloth, about the animal panic of being trapped in a concrete tube with smoke rising from below. They talk about how long it took to descend, how the instructions kept changing, how nobody seemed to know what was happening. The fire exposes uncomfortable truths. The towers are not fireproof. The safety systems are not redundant. The evacuation plans assume order and calm, not chaos and fear. And then the rumors start. Some workers swear the building felt cursed from the beginning. Small fires, electrical failures, elevators dropping suddenly. Others mention the construction deaths, the workers who fell, the accidents that were never fully investigated. A few talk about the land itself, about building on a neighborhood's grave, about the bad energy of displacement. The Port Authority dismisses this as superstition. They commission studies. They point to arson, to human error, to the inevitable challenges of managing a building this size. Every incident has a rational cause. Every failure has a technical explanation. But the cursed reputation sticks. It spreads in break rooms and over lunch, in conversations that mix fear with gallows humor. The towers are tall and impressive and somehow wrong, like a monument built in the wrong place for the wrong reasons. The question forms in the aftermath. If a warning arrives years early, why do powerful systems treat it like noise? The answer is institutional inertia. The Port Authority cannot admit the towers have fundamental flaws without admitting the project was flawed. So they fix what they can, downplay what they cannot, and move forward. They upgrade fire alarms, add sprinklers, improve communication systems. They do not redesign the stairwells. They do not add redundancy to the core. They treat symptoms, not causes. The fire department files a report. The report is detailed and damning. It describes communication failures, equipment limitations, and design choices that prioritize cost over safety. The report recommends changes. Some are implemented. Others are debated, delayed, buried in bureaucracy. The 1975 fire fades from public memory quickly. The towers reopen, tenants return, the daily routine resumes. But something has changed. The myth of invulnerability is broken. The towers are no longer abstract symbols. They are physical places where things can go wrong. The people who evacuated that day do not forget. They know what it feels like to trust a building and have that trust tested. They know that steel and concrete are not guarantees. They know that when smoke fills the air and the lights go out, the only thing that matters is whether the exit is clear. And some of them, years later, will make a different choice about where to work. Safety as an optional purchase. The most chilling cost cut is the one that looks invisible until the day you need it. The towers were designed under the New York City Building Code of 1968. That code was written for traditional skyscrapers, buildings where steel columns carry the load and concrete slabs separate the floors. The World Trade Center used neither approach. The exterior tube design was revolutionary. It was also risky. The load-bearing walls were on the outside, meaning the interior floors hung from the perimeter and the central core. The floors were lightweight, steel trusses supporting concrete poured over metal decking. This design saved weight. It saved money. It created vast, column-free office space. But it also created vulnerabilities. Fire protection was applied to the steel as spray on insulation, a mix of asbestos and other materials that was supposed to prevent the steel from heating to the point of failure. The specifications called for a certain thickness. The application in practice was uneven, rushed, done by crews working against deadlines and budgets. Nobody checked it carefully. The inspections were visual, cursory, done by city officials who were overwhelmed by the scale of the project. The assumption was that the Port Authority, a government entity, would self-regulate responsibly. The assumption was wrong. The stairwells were another compromise. The original design included more exits. The final design reduced them to the minimum allowed by code. The reasoning was practical. More stairwells meant less rentable space. Less rentable space meant lower revenue. Lower revenue meant the financial model broke. So the stairwells were narrowed, minimized, made just sufficient to meet the letter of the law. The spirit of the law, the idea that tall buildings need generous means of egress, was sacrificed to the logic of the spreadsheet. Sprinkler systems were debated extensively. The code did not require full sprinkler coverage for office towers. The Port Authority could have installed comprehensive systems anyway. They chose not to. The cost was significant. The benefit was hypothetical. The decision was made by people who would never work in the buildings. The elevator systems were marvels of engineering and sources of constant complaint. The towers had local elevators, express elevators, and sky lobbies where passengers transferred between systems. The design was efficient for normal operations. It was a nightmare for emergencies. If you needed to evacuate from the 70th floor, you could not simply take an elevator to the ground. The elevators did not work that way. You had to take a local elevator to a sky lobby, then an express elevator to the ground floor. In an emergency, elevators were not supposed to be used at all. Everyone was supposed to use the stairs. The numbers tell the story. Each tower held around 25,000 people on a busy day. The stairwells could handle a full evacuation in about 4 hours, assuming no panic, no smoke, no injuries. 4 hours is an eternity when the building is burning. Some engineers raised concerns. They wrote memos. They suggested design changes. They were overruled by people who pointed to budgets, schedules, and the need to stay competitive with other Class A office space. Safety became a negotiation, not a mandate. The Port Authority's defense was legalistic. They met the code. They exceeded it in some areas. They hired top engineers. They used quality materials. If the code was insufficient, that was the city's problem, not theirs. But the city's code was written for buildings half this tall. Nobody had experience with structures this massive. The World Trade Center was an experiment, and experiments carry risks that do not appear on blueprints. The fire of 1975 forced some improvements. Sprinklers were added to more areas. Alarm systems were upgraded. Emergency lighting was expanded. But the core vulnerabilities remained. The stairwells were still narrow. The floor trusses were still lightweight. The fire protection was still uneven. The question becomes unavoidable. Once the towers are open and politically protected, who can force a redesign? The answer is nobody. Retrofitting an occupied building is expensive, disruptive, and legally complex. Tenants have leases. Businesses have operations. The Port Authority has debt. Closing floors for major structural work would cost millions in lost rent and drive tenants to competitors. So the towers operate with known flaws, managed through procedures and hope. The fire safety plan grows thicker. The evacuation drills become more frequent. The staff is trained to respond to emergencies with calm and precision. But training does not widen stairwells. Procedures do not fireproof steel. Hope is not a safety system. The 1980s bring more incidents. Small fires, false alarms, power failures. Each one is managed, contained, explained. The pattern is always the same. Something goes wrong. The response is adequate. The building survives. The system learns nothing. The engineers who warned about vulnerabilities move on to other projects. The memos are filed. The institutional memory fades. The people operating the towers were not the people who built them. The compromises made during construction are invisible to the staff managing daily operations. By the 1990s, the towers are accepted landmarks. They are no longer controversial. They are part of the skyline, the postcard, the civic identity. Tourists visit the observation deck. Corporations list the address on letterhead. The buildings work, mostly, and working is enough. The final scale arrives in numbers that make the risk tangible. Each tower held 50,000 tons of steel. The floor trusses, the lightweight elements that saved cost, connected to the exterior columns with bolts and small clips. The spray on insulation protecting those connections averaged 1 inch thick, though the specification called for more. The stairwells, 3 in each tower, were each 44 inches wide. At capacity 25,000 people per tower, the evacuation time from the highest floors exceeded 3 hours. The sprinkler systems covered 65% of the building. The rest relied on compartmentalization and the assumption that fire could be contained by closing doors and shutting vents. These are not secrets. They are documented facts, recorded in maintenance logs, engineering reports, and safety audits. But documentation is not the same as action. The towers carry their flaws forward, year after year, because fixing them would require admitting they exist. The building that learned to burn. When a place develops a reputation, every incident feels like fate, even when the cause is painfully ordinary. The towers collect incidents the way old houses collect creaks. 1977, a transformer fire in the sub-basement. 1980, an electrical short on the 43rd floor. 1984, another arson attempt in a storage area. 1990, a small blaze in a tenant space that triggers a partial evacuation. Each fire is contained. Each investigation finds a rational cause: faulty wiring, careless smoking, intentional malice. The Port Authority responds with repairs, upgrades, training. The buildings reopen. Life continues. But the workers notice the pattern. The towers seem to attract trouble. Fires break out more often than in comparable buildings. Equipment fails at higher rates. The curse narrative grows, whispered in elevators, shared over drinks, half believed and half joked about. Some attribute it to the sheer scale. More systems means more failure points. More people means more opportunities for accidents. The towers are not cursed, they are statistical. When you have 10 million square feet, something is always breaking. Others are less sure. They mention the land, the 13 blocks torn out and paved over. They talk about building on a wound, about the bad energy of forced removal. A few claim to feel it, a wrongness in the air, a sense that the towers do not belong. The Port Authority does not engage with supernatural explanations. They deal in budgets and maintenance schedules. But privately, some staff wonder. The towers require constant attention, constant vigilance. The building systems never quite stabilize. There is always another repair, another inspection, another emergency drill. 1993 brings the first bombing. It is February 26th, a Friday afternoon. A truck bomb detonates in the underground parking garage, directly below the North Tower. The explosion creates a crater 5 stories deep. 6 people die. Over 1,000 are injured. Smoke fills both towers. The evacuation takes hours. The attack is terrorism, planned and executed by extremists who want to topple the towers by destroying the foundation. The bomb is powerful, but misplaced. The towers sway, but stand. The structural damage is significant, but repairable. The human damage is different. The evacuation exposes every flaw in the emergency systems. The stairwells fill with smoke. The lighting fails. The communication systems break down. People descend in darkness, some for over an hour, with no information about what happened or whether the building is collapsing. Pregnant women are carried. Disabled workers are abandoned and later rescued. The elderly descend one step at a time, clinging to railings, certain they will die. The scenes in the stairwells are orderly but desperate, a controlled panic that holds together only because collapse seems impossible. The Port Authority responds with security upgrades, vehicle barriers, ID checks, camera systems. The parking garage is rebuilt with blast-resistant materials. The underground access points are redesigned. The focus is on preventing another truck bomb. But the evacuation problems are not addressed. The stairwells are not widened. The communication systems are upgraded but remain vulnerable. The assumption is that the next threat will look like the last one, that terrorism means bombs in basements, not planes in the sky. The curse narrative intensifies after the bombing. The towers have been attacked. They have been targeted. Some workers refuse to return. Others accept higher salaries to stay. The buildings feel different now, less like symbols and more like targets. The incidents continue through the 1990s. 1994, an elevator malfunction traps 12 people for 3 hours. 1996, a fire alarm glitch triggers a false evacuation during rush hour. 1998, a power surge blacks out 30 floors on a summer afternoon. Each incident is managed. Each report identifies a cause and a fix. But the pattern is undeniable. The towers are high maintenance, high stress, high risk. They demand attention and yield crises. The question returns, sharper now. What happens when a symbol becomes too important to criticize? The answer is public silence and private worry. The Port Authority cannot afford to acknowledge persistent problems. The towers are economic engines, tourist attractions, civic icons. Admitting fundamental flaws would invite lawsuits, drive away tenants, destroy property values. So the official line remains optimistic. The towers are safe. The systems are redundant. The staff is trained. Every incident is treated as isolated, anomalous, unconnected to any pattern. But the maintenance logs tell a different story. The work orders pile up. The repair costs escalate. The systems that were supposed to last 30 years are failing after 20. The towers are aging faster than expected, stressed by scale and use. The workers know, they see the decay, the patches, the temporary fixes that become permanent. They know that the towers are not invincible. They know that steel can fail, that smoke can kill, that height is a liability when something goes wrong. Some transfer to other buildings. Others stay but plan escape routes, memorize stairwell locations, keep shoes under their desks in case they need to walk down 100 floors. The towers become a place where you work with one eye on the exit. By 2000, the towers are 27 years old. They are middle-aged in building terms, past the glory of newness, not yet historic enough for preservation. They generate revenue. They anchor the skyline. They function, but they carry scars. The bombing crater is repaired, but not forgotten. The fire damage from 1975 still shows in maintenance records. The accumulated stress of millions of elevator trips, billions of footsteps, decades of weather and wind are written into the structure. The towers are tired. They work, but they work hard. And everyone who spends time inside them knows that working hard is not the same as working safely. The reputation, the curse, the sense of wrongness, all of it persists. Not because the towers are haunted, but because they are flawed. Because they were built with compromises that saved money and cost margin. Because safety was negotiable and consequences were distant. And distance, eventually, runs out. The politics of never admitting fault. The towers do not just stand on steel, they stand on reputation, and reputation is defended like territory. The Port Authority in the 1990s is an institution that has mastered the art of survival through deflection. When problems arise, they are framed as isolated incidents. When critics speak, they are dismissed as alarmists. When evidence mounts, it is countered with studies that conclude everything is fine. This is not conspiracy. It is institutional self-preservation. The Port Authority's bonds are backed by toll revenue and the promise of stable, income-generating assets. The World Trade Center is the largest of those assets. Any admission of systemic problems would crater bond ratings, invite regulatory scrutiny, and destroy the political careers of everyone involved. So the strategy is simple. Manage incidents quietly. Fix what breaks. Never admit a pattern. After the 1993 bombing, The Port Authority commissions safety studies. The studies are thorough. They identify vulnerabilities in communication systems, stairwell capacity, and emergency lighting. The recommendations are detailed and expensive. Some are implemented. ID badges are introduced. Security checkpoints are expanded. The public address system is upgraded. These are visible changes, easy to defend, good for public relations. Other recommendations are shelved. Widening stairwells would require closing floors and displacing tenants. Redesigning elevator systems would cost tens of millions. Installing comprehensive sprinkler coverage would disrupt operations for years. The cost-benefit analysis always concludes the same thing. The risk is manageable, the expense is not. The decision-makers are not engineers. They are administrators, lawyers, political appointees. They rely on consultants who understand that contracts depend on delivering acceptable conclusions. The consultants provide cover. They write reports that acknowledge risk while concluding that current measures are adequate. The budgets tell their own story. Between 1993 and 2000, the Port Authority spends $300 million on World Trade Center security and safety upgrades. That sounds substantial until you break it down. 60% goes to visible security, barriers, cameras, guards. 25% goes to repairs and maintenance that would have been needed anyway. 15% goes to genuine safety improvements. The stairwells remain narrow. The fire protection remains uneven. The evacuation time remains over 3 hours from the top floors. These are known quantities, documented in internal reports that are never released publicly. The tenant relation strategy is equally calculated. When concerns are raised, the response is reassurance. The buildings are regularly inspected. The safety systems are state-of-the-art. The Port Authority has a fiduciary duty to protect occupants. All of this is technically true. None of it addresses the core vulnerabilities. Some tenants leave anyway. Morgan Stanley, which occupied 22 floors, begins planning a move after the bombing. The decision takes years, slowed by leases and logistics, but the direction is clear. The company wants out. They want lower floors, buildings with more exits, locations that do not feel like targets. The Port Authority does not fight the departure. They replace Morgan Stanley with other tenants, often at lower rents. The vacancy rate ticks up slightly, but remains manageable. The financial model is stressed, but functional. The question sharpens. Is the real corruption cash, or the refusal to tell the truth? The answer is both. The corruption is not bribes or kickbacks. It is the quiet agreement among people who benefit from the status quo to never ask dangerous questions. It is the lawyer who does not push for full discovery. It is the engineer who softens conclusions. It is the politician who praises the towers publicly while privately acknowledging their problems. The system protects itself through diffusion of responsibility. No single person is accountable. The Port Authority Board approves budgets but does not review maintenance logs. The executive director manages operations but defers to technical staff. The engineers report problems but do not make policy. Everyone has a role. No one has the power or the incentive to force change. The media plays its part. After the initial coverage of the bombing, interest fades. The towers are old news. Reporters move on to other stories. The investigative pieces that might have forced transparency are never written, or are written and ignored. The public forgets. The towers return to being background, a piece of the skyline, unremarkable in their familiarity. Tourists visit the observation deck. Office workers ride the elevators. The daily routine absorbs the danger, normalizes it, makes it invisible. by the late 1990s. The political consensus is clear. The towers are safe enough. The improvements are sufficient. The risk is acceptable. Anyone who says otherwise is exaggerating, seeking attention, or misunderstanding the complexity of managing buildings this large. The internal culture reinforces this. Staff who raise concerns are labeled difficult. Engineers who write critical memos are sidelined. The organization rewards people who solve problems quietly and punish those who make noise. A third-scale paragraph appears in budget documents that few outside the agency ever see. The World Trade Center operating budget for fiscal year 1998 is $212 million. Of that, $86 million goes to debt service on construction bonds. $43 million goes to basic maintenance, cleaning, and utilities. $32 million goes to security and insurance. The remaining $51 million covers administration, capital improvements, and contingency funds. The margin between revenue and expense is thin, less than 5%. Any major disruption, any extended vacancy, any large-scale retrofit would push the complex into operating losses. The financial pressure to avoid expensive safety upgrades is written into the structure itself. The politics of never admitting fault becomes the politics of never having to. The Port Authority answers to two governors, New York and New Jersey, who have little incentive to dig into the details. The federal government has no jurisdiction. The city has no leverage. The agency operates in a space between authorities, accountable to everyone in theory, no one in practice. The result is drift. The towers age. The systems degrade. The known problems persist. And the people responsible sleep well because they have reports and studies and consultants who all agree that everything is under control. Until the day it is not. The day. The myth turned global. The world remembers a single morning, but the towers had been rehearsing catastrophe through smaller failures for decades. September 11th, 2001 begins like any other Tuesday. The sky is clear, the air is cool. The towers fill with workers arriving for the day, coffee in hand, briefcases and laptops, the routine rhythm of commerce beginning again. At 8:46, American Airlines Flight 11 strikes the North Tower between the 93rd and 99th floors. The plane is traveling at 440 miles per hour. The impact is catastrophic. The collision severs load-bearing columns on the north face. Jet fuel ignites, creating fireballs that sweep through multiple floors. The explosion is visible from miles away. Smoke pours from the wound. Inside the tower, the people above the impact are trapped. The plane has destroyed all 3 stairwells in the strike zone. There is no way down. The elevators are disabled. The only options are wait or jump. Below the impact, the evacuation begins. The stairwells fill immediately. Thousands of people descend in orderly lines, guided by instinct and minimal information. The lights are out in some sections. The air smells like burning fuel. Nobody knows if the building will stand. At 9:03, United Airlines Flight 175 hits the South Tower between the 77th and 85th floors. The second impact removes any doubt. This is not an accident. This is an attack. The evacuation intensifies. People run. The stairwells become crowded, chaotic. Some floors receive announcements telling them to return to their desks, that the South Tower is safe. People who obey that instruction die. People who ignore it and flee survive. The fires burn with a intensity the buildings were never designed to withstand. The jet fuel ignites contents, furniture, paper, carpet. The temperatures reach 1800 degrees Fahrenheit. The steel begins to soften. At 9:59, the South Tower collapses. The entire structure, 110 stories, falls in 10 seconds. The collapse begins at the impact zone, where fire has weakened the floor trusses. The trusses sag, pulling the exterior columns inward. When the columns fail, the floors above drop. The weight is too much. Each floor pancakes onto the one below. The collapse generates a dust cloud that engulfs lower Manhattan. The debris field spreads for blocks. The sound is described as thunder, as a freight train, as the earth splitting open. At 10:28, the North Tower collapses. The sequence is the same. Fire weakens steel, floors sag, columns fail. The structure gives way all at once. The towers, which were supposed to stand for centuries, last less than 2 hours from impact to collapse. The numbers are unbearable. 2,753 people die in and around the towers. 343 firefighters die climbing stairs to reach trapped workers. 23 police officers die in the collapse. Hundreds more die on the plains. The human cost is beyond calculation. Families destroyed, children orphaned, communities shattered. The grief is global, immediate, overwhelming. But the collapse also reveals the accumulated failures. The narrow stairwells became death traps. The communication systems failed completely. The fire protection did not hold. Every vulnerability that engineers warned about, every compromise made to save cost, every deferred maintenance decision, all of it contributed to the speed of the collapse. The investigation that follows identifies specific failures. The floor trusses, lightweight and unprotected, could not withstand sustained heat. The connections between the trusses and the exterior columns failed when the steel expanded. The spray on insulation was too thin, applied carelessly, never adequate for the scenario it faced. The stairwells, the 3 per tower, were all located in the core. The plane impacts destroyed them simultaneously, trapping everyone above. If the exits had been distributed across the building, some might have survived. The evacuation from below the impact zones succeeded largely through luck. The stairwells held. The building stood long enough for most people to escape, but the margin was thin. If the collapse had come earlier, the death toll would have been far higher. The 5th scale paragraph quantifies the unimaginable. Each tower contained 92 elevators distributed across 7 shafts. The North Tower impact severed all elevator cables in the North Core, killing dozens instantly. The fire spread at a rate of 1 floor every 3 to 5 minutes. The South Tower stood for 56 minutes after impact. The North Tower stood for 102 minutes. In that time, approximately 14,000 people evacuated from below the impact zones. Above the impact, in the North Tower, 1,355 people were trapped with no means of escape. In the South Tower, the impact was lower and offset, leaving 1 stairwell partially intact. 18 people used that stairwell to escape from above the impact zone. 18 out of nearly 600. The investigation avoids blame, but documents the cascade. The towers fell because planes hit them, but they fell faster, more completely, more catastrophically than they should have. The design vulnerabilities, the construction shortcuts, the maintenance deferrals, all of it mattered in the final moments. The Port Authority does not survive scrutiny. The agency is restructured, its leadership replaced, its authority curtailed. The towers become a case study in institutional failure, a warning about what happens when safety is negotiable and accountability is diffuse. But the towers also become something else, a symbol, a memorial, a wound that defines a generation. The eerie feeling that haunted the buildings, the curse that workers half believed, is retrospectively validated, not through supernatural means, but through the accumulation of choices that made disaster inevitable. The towers were built with flaws. They operated with known risks. They burned and fell because those flaws and risks were never addressed. The paranormal narrative and the grounded explanation merge. The towers felt wrong because they were wrong. The sense of danger was not mysticism. It was awareness, a conscious or unconscious, that the buildings carried their failures forward every day. The day the myth turned global was not the day the towers fell. It was the day they were built, on land taken by force, with safety treated as optional, with ambition valued over prudence. September 11th is the culmination, not the cause. The ruins that became real estate. After the smoke, the most American question arrives fast. Who owns the ground now? The site is 16 acres of wreckage. Steel beams twisted like wire. Concrete pulverized into dust. The basement levels flooded, a subterranean lake contaminated with jet fuel, asbestos, and human remains. The cleanup will take 9 months. The emotional recovery will take lifetimes. But even before the fires are extinguished, the negotiations begin. The site is not just sacred ground. It is prime Manhattan real estate, worth billions, controlled by agencies and leaseholders with competing claims and conflicting interests. Larry Silverstein holds the lease. He signed it in July 2001, just weeks before the attack. The deal gave him control of the World Trade Center for 99 years in exchange for $3.2 billion in financing. He planned to renovate the towers, raise rents, maximize returns. Instead, he is negotiating insurance claims on buildings that no longer exist. The insurance fight is brutal and public. Silverstein argues that 2 planes mean 2 attacks, triggering 2 separate insurance payouts. The insurers argue it was a single coordinated event. The dispute goes to court. Silverstein eventually wins partial victory, securing $4.5 billion. It is not enough to rebuild, but it is enough to start. The Port Authority still owns the land. They want the site redeveloped quickly, a show of resilience, a proof that terrorism cannot break New York. But they also want control, a say in design, a guarantee that the new buildings serve civic goals, not just private profit. The federal government allocates money, the September 11th Victim Compensation Fund, the Community Development Block Grants, the Liberty Bonds that offer tax-free financing for Lower Manhattan projects. By the time the accounting is done, over $20 billion in public funds flow into the reconstruction. The memorial becomes a battlefield. Families of victims want the entire site preserved. No new buildings, only remembrance. Developers want towers, commerce, life returning to normal. Politicians want both, a memorial that honors the dead and an economic engine that proves recovery. The competition to design the memorial attracts 5,200 entries. The winner is Michael Arad, an architect who proposes 2 square voids, footprints of the original towers with water cascading into darkness. The design is simple, powerful, and expensive. The budget is $60 million. The final cost is $700 million. The new towers rise slowly. One World Trade Center, designed by David Childs, claims the symbolic height of 1,776 feet. The building is fortress-like, its base encased in concrete, its glass facade engineered to resist blast and impact. It is a monument to resilience and a confession that the threat remains. The site also becomes a laboratory for security design. Bollards line the streets. Cameras monitor every approach. Airflow systems are designed to contain chemical or biological attacks. The buildings are not just tall, they are defended. The financial logic of rebuilding is strained. Lower Manhattan office space is less desirable after September 11th. Companies leave, citing security concerns, employee morale, trauma. The vacancy rate downtown spikes. The new towers open with uncertain demand. But the buildings rise anyway, driven by insurance money, public subsidies, and political will. The site cannot remain empty. Empty means the terrorists won. Rebuilding, even at a loss, is necessary. A sixth-scale paragraph measures legacy as ledger. The original World Trade Center cost $800 million in 1970s money, equivalent to $6 billion today. The reconstruction, including One World Trade Center, the memorial, the transit hub, and the supporting buildings, costs over $25 billion. One World Trade Center alone consumes $3.9 billion. The memorial and museum add $1.5 billion. The transit hub, designed by Santiago Calatrava, costs $4 billion, making it the most expensive train station ever built. The site generates approximately $2.3 billion annually in economic activity, from office rents, retail, and tourism. The insurance payouts, federal grants, and tax incentives cover most construction costs, but the operating expenses and debt service remain. The site will not generate positive returns for decades, if ever. The question cuts deep. Can a place be healed while it is still being sold? The answer is that healing and commerce are not opposites in New York. The city has always rebuilt on its wounds, turned tragedy into transaction. The memorial coexists with office towers. Grief coexists with rent rolls. This is not cynicism. It is survival. But the survivors and families feel the tension. They see the site marketed, the observation deck tickets sold, the September 11th brand monetized. Some accept it as necessary. Others feel betrayed, as if the dead are being used to justify profit. The memorial opens on the 10th anniversary, September 11th, 2011. The names of the victims are inscribed in bronze around the voids. Water falls into pools that seem bottomless. The sound dampens the city noise, creating a space of quiet in the middle of chaos. Visitors come by the millions. They touch the names. They leave flowers. They cry. The site becomes a pilgrimage, a place where the global trauma is condensed into 16 acres. But the site is also awkward, unfinished, half sacred, and half construction zone. Cranes swing above the memorial. Fences block views. The retail spaces struggle to find tenants. The vision of a unified, coherent redevelopment never quite materializes. The ruins became real estate, but the real estate never fully escaped the ruins. The Rockefeller shadow in the glass. A family can lose control of a story, but the story still carries their fingerprints. David Rockefeller does not live to see the towers fall. He dies in March 2017 at the age of 101, having outlived the monument he demanded. In his later years, he rarely spoke about the World Trade Center. When asked, he emphasized the positive: jobs created, international prestige, downtown revitalization. He did not mention Radio Row. He did not discuss the financial struggles, the vacancy crisis, the years when the towers were liabilities masquerading as assets. His public statements framed the project as visionary, necessary, successful. But the historical record is more complicated. The towers were David Rockefeller's attempt to reshape Lower Manhattan in his family's image, to impose order and grandeur on a district that was changing in ways he could not control. The project succeeded on some terms. Downtown did not collapse. Chase Manhattan stayed. The skyline was transformed, but the cost was extracted from people who had no say. Radio Row was erased. The merchants were displaced. The neighborhood's memory was bulldozed. And the towers themselves, the monuments to trade and ambition, carried that original violence forward. The Rockefeller legacy is visible throughout New York. Rockefeller Center, built during the Depression, remains an architectural triumph, a complex that works as urbanism, commerce, and public space. The World Trade Center, by contrast, was an imposition, a project that never quite fit, never quite succeeded on its own terms. The difference is revealing. Rockefeller Center was built with private money on private land. The World Trade Center was built with public authority on condemned land. One was negotiated with the city, the other was forced upon it. The family's name appears nowhere on the towers. There is no Rockefeller Plaza at the World Trade Center, no plaque crediting David's vision. The distance is intentional. The Rockefellers understood that taking credit for controversial projects carries risk. Better to let the Port Authority absorb the blame. But the fingerprints remain. The scale, the ambition, the disregard for market signals, the certainty that power can reshape reality. These are Rockefeller traits, patterns visible across generations. The public memory of the towers simplifies the story. The towers become symbols of American hubris or resilience, depending on perspective. The complexity, the human cost, the institutional failures, all of it gets flattened into a single narrative. Towers built, towers fell, never forget. The question returns, when history gets polished, who benefits from the shine? The answer is institutions and families who can control their archives, shape their biographies, and fund the scholarships that write their histories. The Rockefeller family has done this expertly for a century. Their papers are preserved. Their buildings are landmarks. Their name is synonymous with philanthropy and public service. The displaced merchants of Radio Row have no archive. Their businesses left no records. Their grievances were not preserved. They are footnotes mentioned briefly in histories of urban renewal, then forgotten. David Rockefeller's biography, published before his death, devotes less than 3 pages to the World Trade Center. The tone is detached, almost clinical. He describes the project as economically rational, architecturally significant, and politically necessary. The human cost is not discussed, but others remember differently. The families who lost businesses, the workers who evacuated in darkness, the firefighters who climbed stairs that should have been wider, the victims who died in buildings that should have been safer. The towers reflected an old money hunger for permanence, a desire to leave marks on the landscape that outlast the body. David Rockefeller got his wish. The towers stood for 28 years, long enough to become iconic. Their destruction made them immortal. But immortality is not legacy. Legacy is what you leave behind in the lives you touch. And by that measure, the World Trade Center is a mixed inheritance. Jobs and grief, ambition and ash. A monument that proved you can force a building into existence, but you cannot force it to be loved. The Rockefeller shadow in the glass is not visible from street level. You have to know the history, trace the decisions, follow the money. But once you see it, though you cannot unsee it, the towers were not inevitable, they were chosen, and the consequences of that choice are written in stone and memory. What a city hates, it remembers. New York does not forgive easily, but it never stops building, even on wounds that still ache. The final question is whether the towers were cursed by fate or by design. The paranormal thread that runs through their history, the sense of wrongness, the accumulation of crises, all of it invites mystical explanations. A neighborhood erased, a monument built on stolen ground, a structure that burned and finally fell. But fate is just a name we give to choices when we do not want to own them. The towers were not cursed. They were compromised. They were built with known flaws, operated with accepted risks, and defended with institutional denial. Every fire, every evacuation, every near disaster was a warning. The warnings were documented, studied, and filed away. The people who made those choices had reasons, budgets, deadlines, political pressures, the logic of cost-benefit analysis that weighs dollars against hypothetical danger. They were not villains. They were bureaucrats, doing what bureaucrats do, managing risk, deferring expense, protecting institutions. But the consequences were real. The narrow stairwells, the inadequate fire protection, the communication failures. These were not acts of God. They were design decisions made by people with names and titles, people who went home to families and believed they were doing their jobs. The towers stood for 28 years. For most of that time, they functioned. People worked there, built careers, raised children on the salaries earned in those offices. The buildings were part of the fabric of the city, unremarkable in their dailiness. But they were also time bombs. Not because of terrorists, though terrorism found them, but because of the accumulated weight of shortcuts, compromises, and deferred maintenance. The towers were always fragile, always vulnerable, always one crisis away from catastrophe. The September 11th attacks did not create the vulnerabilities. They exposed them. The final scale paragraph lands as a closing drumbeat of numbers that make the human cost real without turning it into spectacle. The North Tower stood for 102 minutes after impact, allowing approximately 5,000 people below the impact zone to evacuate. The average descent time from the highest occupied floors was over 90 minutes, with individuals reporting stair travel of 2 hours or more. The South Tower stood for 56 minutes, a shorter window that still permitted the evacuation of approximately 4,000 people. The Port Authority estimated that a full building evacuation under ideal conditions would take 3.5 to 4 hours. On September 11th, most people escaped, not because the system worked, but because the building stood long enough despite their flaws. The margin between mass survival and mass casualty was measured in minutes, not design. The open verdict on the curse is this: the towers felt wrong because they were wrong. Not haunted, but flawed. Not fated, but built with compromises that made disaster more likely. New York remembers. The memorial is visited by millions. The names are read aloud every anniversary. The void in the skyline was eventually filled, but the void in memory remains. But New York also builds. One World Trade Center rises taller than its predecessors. The surrounding towers fill with tenants. The neighborhood returns, not as it was, but as something new. This is the city's nature. It does not dwell. It replaces. The towers are gone, but their story persists. It is a story about ambition unmoored from consequence, about power exercised without accountability, about systems that protect themselves at the expense of the people they are meant to serve. It is also a story about human resilience. The firefighters who climbed, the office workers who helped strangers in the dark, the families who rebuilt lives from wreckage, the city that refused to break. What does this story reveal about ambition, wealth, beauty, and loss when the monument outlives the people who demanded it? It reveals that monuments are not innocent. They carry the intentions of their builders, the compromises of their construction, the uses and misuses of their existence. The World Trade Center was supposed to prove that downtown mattered, that New York was the center of the world, that vision and will could reshape reality. It proved something different. It proved that buildings are not just steel and glass. They are choices encoded in concrete. And when those choices are made in the service of ego rather than need, when safety is secondary to symbolism, when power erases resistance and calls it progress, the cost eventually comes due. The bill for the World Trade Center was paid in lives, grief, and a wound that will never fully close. David Rockefeller wanted a monument. He got one. But the monument does not celebrate him. It mourns the people who died inside his vision. The towers are remembered, but not as he intended. They are remembered for what they cost, not what they symbolized. For the workers who fell, not the commerce they housed. For the moment when ambition and tragedy collided, and the city learned once again that building tall is easy. Building right is harder. New York hates slowly and remembers long. The towers are gone. The curse, if it ever existed, is lifted. But the lesson remains, carved into the absence where the towers once stood. Ego builds and systems collect the bill.